האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Good evening, Erev Tov, Dober V'Yetcher. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Trumah. We're going to do Os Hey, section number 5. Before we begin, let's take a look at two psukim from the beginning of our Parsha. This is Perek Chaf Hey, psukim Aleph and Beis, beginning of Parshas Trumah. Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. And Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, Pasuk Beis, Daber el Bnei Yisrael. Speak to Bnei Yisrael, v'yikchu li truma, and they should take for me a donation. Me'es call ish from every man, asher yidvenu libo, whose heart motivates him to donate. Tikchu es trumasi, you should take my donation. So those are the two psukim, and the Zera Shimshon is going to jump right in on the first two psukim there in our parsha. Parshas Trumah Os Hey, section 5. Zera Shimshon says pasuk, and the pasuk it says me'es call ish asher yidvenu libo, from every man whose heart motivates him to donate. Yesh ledayek, we need to analyze. Me'es call ish, from the words from every man. Lima'ute mai, what does this come to exclude? Meaning, why didn't Hashem just say, take donations? Why did Hashem say, take donations from every man, from every ish? Ein lomar lima'ute isha, and we can't say that those words about a man come to exclude a woman, shahare matzinu, because behold, we find shegam hanoshim heviu nidvasan, that the women at that time also brought donations. Taba'as, agil, v'chumaz, they brought rings and nose rings and earrings. Vayavo ha'anoshim al hanoshim, and we also have a pasuk that comes from later, several parshios later, actually, but we have a pasuk that specifically says, "Vayavo ha'anoshim al hanoshim," and the men came in addition to the women to make the donation. So Zera Shimshon's first question, he's going to start off with 3 questions here. His first question is, why did the Torah say, "Me'es call ish," from every man, which you might think means take donations from every man, but not from the women? And the Zera Shimshon says, but you can't really say that because we see that the women did donate and donations were accepted from the women. So what exactly does it mean from every man if it's not coming to exclude the women? What does it mean? The agav, and along the way of answering that first question, Yuvan, we need to understand, or we will understand, hakefel shel tikchu es trumasi, the repetition of the words, you should take my truma. In the 2 psukim that we read a few moments ago, we saw that Hashem says in the beginning of pasuk Beis, v'yikchu es trumasi, and you should take, v'yikchu li truma, and you should take for me the donation. And then at the end of that same pasuk, it repeats, tikchu es trumasi, you should take my donation. So the Zera Shimshon says, along the way of answering the first question, we also need to explain why the pasuk says twice the language of taking a donation for Hashem. Why did we need to say that twice in the pasuk? V'tam, and we also will bring an explanation for v'yikchu li truma. You should take for me a donation. The word li, for me, is extra. And let's see what Rashi says about that. Sheperish Rashi explains, li, for me, lishmi, for my sake. V'halo, but is it not true? Kol ha-mitzvos tzorech la'asosam l'shem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Don't we have to do all mitzvos for the sake of Hashem? When we do any mitzvah, we should do it for the sake of Hashem. And so why umay shna mitzvah zo? So what was different or unique about this mitzvah? Sheperish ba li lishmi, that it explicitly said, do it for me, meaning do the mitzvah for my sake. So those are the 3 questions, and let's just quickly run through them again, make sure we have them very clearly in our minds. Question number one is, what is the Torah excluding when it says, may ace call ish, take donations from every man? What exactly does the Torah mean? Take from the men, but not the women? Well, that doesn't seem to work. So take from every man, but not who? Why does it have to put in the word take from an ish, from each man? That's question one. Question two, why does it say twice in the pasuk, take Trumah, take my donation from me, and then you should take my donation? That certainly seems redundant. Why say the same thing twice? And question number three, why does it say v'yikhu li, take for me a donation? The word li, which Rashi says means take it for me, Hashem, take it in mind that you're doing a mitzvah for me, for my sake. Zera Shimshon says, why did we spell that out here when that's something that applies to all mitzvos? Why did we need to put in the word li here if it's just to teach us the general idea that when we do a mitzvah, when we fulfill a commandment, we should do it for Hashem's sake. We should do it with Hashem in mind. Those are the three questions. Next paragraph. Vehine amru. And behold, Chazal say in Meseches Kiddushin, Godol ha-mitzuveh ve'oseh, a person who is commanded to to do a mitzvah and does so is greater, yoser mimi she'eno mitzuveh ve'oseh, more than someone who is not commanded to do the mitzvah and does the mitzvah. So the Zera Shimshon says we need to start with a well-known principle from the Gemara, from Chazal, that a person who does a mitzvah when he is commanded to do so is considered on a higher level or considered greater than a person who does that same mitzvah but was not commanded to do so. Umilvad hatam shenosnu bozeh hameforshim, besides the reason that the commentators give for this idea, umashe kasavnu gam onu, and also besides for what we wrote about this in different contexts, od yesh lomar, there's another point to say, another point to be made as to why a person who is commanded to do a mitzvah is considered greater when he does the mitzvah than someone who is not commanded to do the mitzvah. Shahamitzuveh ve'oseh, when a person is commanded to do a mitzvah and does the mitzvah, Bisman she'oseh osa mitzvah, when at the time that he fulfills that mitzvah, that he performs that mitzvah, yochol lomar, he is able to say, moving to the next page, top of the right column, she'oseh mitzvah zo, that he is doing this mitzvah, he's fulfilling this commandment, kedei lekayim mitzvahs boro, in order to fulfill the commandment of his creator, shetzivohu koch, who commanded him to do this. U'lishem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he's able to say that he is doing the mitzvah in the name of Hashem because Hashem commanded him to do the mitzvah. And that's what applies when a person does a mitzvah that he is commanded to do. Aval mi she'eino mitzuveh ba'osa mitzvah. But someone who is not commanded to do a mitzvah, eino yochol lomar, he is not able to say, l'shem ha-mitzvah shetzivahu boro, that he's doing it in the name of the one who commanded him, that he was commanded by his creator to do the mitzvah, shahare lo tziva, because to him, to the person who's not commanded to do the mitzvah, lo tziva, Hashem didn't give a command to do it. So the Zera Shimshon starts off with this building block of a famous concept, as we said, about a person who's commanded to do a mitzvah being considered greater when he does the mitzvah than someone who isn't commanded. And then he adds a new explanation of that. In addition to the more common ones, it says there's another additional explanation, and that is that the person who's commanded to do a mitzvah can legitimately say, when I did the mitzvah, when I do this mitzvah, I'm going to have in mind that Hashem commanded me to do it, and that's why I'm doing it. However, a person who was never commanded to do a certain mitzvah and then decides to fulfill the mitzvah, which of course is a laudatory act, a meritorious act, but nonetheless, that person cannot have in mind, I am doing this mitzvah because Hashem commanded me to do so, because the person is eino mitzuvah, not commanded to do this particular mitzvah. So the Zera Shimshon wants to set that up to begin with. Next paragraph. V'lo mibaya, and we are not required to say, leman de omar, that this idea only applies to the opinion that says, or to, you might say, to the school of thought, shahanoshim einon mivarchos, that women do not make a bracha al mitzvos aseh shehazman grama, if they do a positive mitzvah which is time bound. We know that women are generally exempt from time-bound positive commandments. We'll get back to that idea in a moment. She'enon yecholos lomar v'tzivanu. Why don't they make a bracha? Because they are not able to say the word, and Hashem commanded us to do the mitzvah. So the Zera Shimshon says, you don't have to say that only according to that school of thought are women not considered included in a mitzvah that they're not commanded to do. Ela af leman de omar, but even according to the other opinion who says the shapir mikre vitzivanu, that it's accurate to use the word vitzivanu and for women to say vitzivanu and Hashem commanded us. Why can they say Hashem commanded them to do a mitzvah if it's a time-bound positive mitzvah that they're not obligated to do? Lefi shenot lo saleh hasochar, because they receive a reward, they receive schar for doing even those mitzvos that they are not commanded to do. So let's pause here to explain these ideas that the Zera Shimshon's presenting to us before we continue with the paragraph. There's a machloket, a famous argument about whether or not when a woman, just as an example, there are many cases of men or other people who do a mitzvah when they're not commanded to do so. But here we're talking specifically about women who decide they would like to do a mitzvah that they are exempt from, specifically one of the many mitzvos that are considered positive mitzvos that are time-bound. A positive mitzvah, a mitzvah saseh, means something, some act that the Torah tells people to do. That's a mitzvah saseh, a positive mitzvah. Shehazman grama means that time determines when the mitzvah applies. It's not a mitzvah, in other words, that applies all the time. It's a mitzvah that only applies during certain times. So again, as we said, there's a general rule. There are exceptions, of course, many important exceptions, but there's a general rule that women are not obligated to perform positive mitzvos, to do actions, in other words, that are commanded, if they are only commanded during specific times. So there's an argument, if a woman does one of those types of commandments, one of those types of mitzvos, does she make a bracha? The first school of thought that the Zera Shimshon mentioned says women do not make the bracha when they do so. Let's use as an example to put on a talit. A woman is exempt from wearing a talis, but let's imagine that she are doing the mitzvah of tzitzis in general. Let's imagine a woman says she'd like to put on a talis, for example, at davening. She is certainly allowed to do so. She's allowed to do it like any mitzvah that is a time-bound positive mitzvah. She's exempt from it, but she can do it. If she does it, the first opinion says she does not make a bracha, because she can't say the word vitzivanu, that Hashem commanded her to wear a talis or to wear tzitzis, because she's not in fact commanded to wear tzitzis or a talis. So therefore, that's the first opinion. However, the second opinion that the Zera Shimshon mentions is another school of thought that says women, if they do a positive time-bound mitzvah, for example, putting on a talis, are in fact allowed to make the bracha, because they aren't technically commanded to do it. However, they receive a schar, they receive spiritual reward for doing it, even though they're not commanded to do this particular mitzvah. And therefore, they can say vitzivanu. That is an argument amongst the poskim, the halachic authorities, that applies to many, many types of cases when women decide to fulfill a mitzvah that they're not obligated to fulfill, such as these time-bound positive mitzvah. So the Zera Shimshon says you might think that only according to the school of thought that women don't make a bracha because they're not can't really use the word tzivonu correctly. You might think only according to that opinion did we say before that a woman can't truly fulfill a mitzvah when it's not her mitzvah to do. And Zera Shimshon says, no, even according to the other school of thought that says she can make a bracha, she's still not considered really included in the mitzvah, as he's going to explain right now. Mikol Mokum, nevertheless, meaning even though the second opinion says she can make a bracha, Einon Yecholos Lechavein L'Shem Mitzvah Legamre. Women who do mitzvahs that they're not obligated to do cannot have in mind that they are fully doing it because they were commanded to do so. Kimo ha'anashim, like men who are commanded in the particular mitzvah that the Zera Shimshon is discussing, in any particular mitzvah when men are commanded. A woman can't have the same kavanah, the same intention. Shahare ha'anashim he mitzuvim, because in these types of mitzvahs, men are actually commanded to do them. Against their will, they are obligated to do the mitzvah, meaning it's not up to them. It's not up to their discretion to do the mitzvahs that they are commanded to do. They're obligated to do the mitzvahs that they are commanded to do. And their intention, la'asos ha-mitzvah, is to do the commandment, shetzivam HaKadosh Baruch Hu la'asosa, that Hashem commanded them to do. That's what men have in mind, are able to have in mind when they do a mitzvah that they were commanded to do. Aval hanoshim, but women, when they do a mitzvah that they were not commanded to do, lo tzivam HaKadosh Baruch Hu la'asosa behachi. Hashem did not command them to do that particular mitzvah. Ela kefi ritzonam, but rather it's according to their desire. Im rotzim la'asosa, if they want to do it, then they can do it. V'lochein amru, and therefore Chazal said, going back to the principle that the Zera Shimshon presented in the previous paragraph, therefore Chazal said, Godol ha-mitzvah ve'oseh, someone is greater if they're commanded to do a mitzvah, mimi she'eno mitzvah ve'oseh, than someone who does a mitzvah but was not commanded to do it. So the Zera Shimshon has spent the last two paragraphs somewhat fully, very fully explaining to us that there's a big difference between people who are commanded to do a mitzvah and do it, and people who are not commanded to do a mitzvah and do it. Because only when you're commanded can you really have in mind the full intention that you're doing the mitzvah because Hashem commanded you to do it. If you weren't commanded to do the mitzvah and you do the mitzvah, then you can have in mind many beautiful, important things. Hashem, even though I'm not commanded to do this mitzvah, I still want to do it. I want to do as many mitzvahs as I can. I want to be close to you. I want to grow spiritually. A person can and should have all amazing kavanos and intentions when they do a mitzvah, even though they're not commanded to do it. But the thing they can't have in mind is, I'm doing this mitzvah because Hashem commanded me to do it. And that kavana, that idea to have in mind, is considered important enough and significant enough that the Gemara, that Chazal distinguish between people who are commanded to do a mitzvah and therefore can have that very special intent in mind that they're doing it because Hashem commanded them to. Chazal say that puts them on a on a higher level in terms of doing this particular mitzvah than someone who does it even though he or she is not commanded to do it. And that's a general rule in principle. As I said before, this is not limited. This discussion is not limited to men and women. There are certainly many mitzvos that men are not obligated to do. And if a man does one of those mitzvos, the same idea would apply. And there are many mitzvos that women are obligated to do, and they can then have in mind, I'm doing this mitzvah because Hashem actually commanded me to do it. But in general, the Zera Shimshon explained why we say the principle of Godol mitzvah ve'oseh, it's greater to be commanded when you do a mitzvah than to be not commanded when you do the same mitzvah. Next paragraph. Uvozeh novo levayer hakosav. With this in mind, meaning with the information from the previous two paragraphs, we can now come to explain the psukim that we looked at in the beginning of this section. Hoil shahanoshim einon birishusan, since women it is not in their own authority, lahavi kol ma sheyindov libon, to bring any donation that their heart might motivate them to bring. And here, as you'll see, we're talking specifically about married women, not single women who could bring whatever they would like. But married women, it's not fully in their control to bring whatever they want to donate to the Mishkan. Shahare kol mashe konsa isha konabala. Because we have a general rule. Again, there are important exceptions to this rule, but we have a general rule that says things that a woman acquires belong to her husband. Vitzorich rishus habal, and therefore a woman would need permission from her husband to make a donation to the Mishkan, because any property that she had, if she was taking property that actually only belonged to the husband, then of course she would need to ask her husband. But even if she's taking property that, let's say, is from, she bought with money that she earned, let's say, that general rule is that that item belongs to her husband, so she's not able to donate it without asking him. Lo haya yochol hakosub litzavos lenoshim. Therefore, the Torah could not command women to donate items to the Mishkan. The Torah couldn't say, give women a command to donate to the Mishkan, because married women couldn't do it on their own volition. They would need to get permission. Again, that's a general rule. There are exceptions. Shahare kohu hadin, because this is the law, actually, as it's brought down, as you'll see right now in Shulchan Aruch. Ein lokchem min hanoshim eladovar muat. If a collection is being made for a worthy cause, people should not take money from married women unless it's something small, unless it's a relatively modest amount. Va'af ba'oso hadover muat, and even if you're talking about a small amount, im habal mocha umakbid, if the woman's husband objects to this and is particular about it, in other words, he says, no, I do not want my wife to make even that small donation, ein lokchen mehen. We do not take that donation from the women. This halacha is specifically talking about, again, the general situation when the rule applies that the property that belongs to the married woman belongs to her husband. If you have a situation where the woman, let's say, forgoes support from her husband, and she says, I don't require my husband to support me, and therefore anything I make and benefit for, any money that I make or from my, however I raise money, will belong to me, then the money does belong to her, and she's allowed to give whatever she would like in terms of donations or use her money however she wishes to. But in the general situation where the rule applies that she has to ask her husband, then we shouldn't really take any donation from the woman unless she gets permission from her husband, or unless it's such a small amount that he won't have any problem with it. Kedisnan, as it was taught in a Mishnah in Maseches Baba Kama, v'chulon she'amru, and all of them that they said, lehatmin, to hide, usher, it's forbidden. What that Mishnah is talking about is as follows. The Mishnah says that there were cases of women who were trying to sell goods in the marketplace, let's say. And when people came and they wanted to buy it, the woman said, okay, great, I'll sell it to you, but don't tell my husband. That's what lahatmin. Lahatmin means to hide, to conceal. So if women are saying, when they're selling something, here, I'm selling it to you, or I'm giving it to you, but don't tell my husband, usher. The Mishnah says it's forbidden to take that article or item from them, because you can see from what the woman's doing, the married woman is trying to hide it, that she's assuming her husband doesn't want her to sell this item or to give this item to someone else. So therefore, it's forbidden to take it. Ulefichach, because of this, Omar me'es kol ish asher yidvenu libo. That's why the pasuk said, take donations for the Mishkan from every man whose heart motivates him to donate. Velo me'es isha. But you cannot take donations from every woman, because if it's a married woman, she might need to get permission from her husband. So this answers the Zera Shimshon's first question. Remember that he posed 3 questions in the beginning in the first paragraph. And the first question was, why does the Torah say me'es call ish from take donations from every man. Is it not true that women could also donate? So now the Zera Shimshon has taught us that the Torah couldn't command women to donate items because they might that might go against the wishes of their husband, and therefore the Torah didn't give them a command to do so. And so the Torah says, take donations from every man. You're certainly safe when you do so, but from every woman, you can't have a general. We can't say generally you can. You have to find out the situation. Is it a single woman, in which case she can make a donation? Is it a married woman who's in a situation where her things belong to her? Then you can take a donation. Is it a married woman where she has permission from her husband already? And that would be okay. So there's lots of situations when you can donate from a woman, when you can receive a donation from a woman towards the Mishkan, but there are many cases where you might not be able to. So that's why it says, Me'es kol ish. It gives you the general mitzvah, take from all of the men. So that's the first part of that's the first question being answered. Next paragraph. Ulefichach, and therefore, Amar v'yikchuli. We now can also answer the third question, which was about why did the Torah say, take for me, lishmi, for my sake, me'es kol ish, from every man? Shezeh efshar ela be'anoshim. Why does it emphasize take it for me? This is impossible with the women, but only possible with the men. The lo b'noshim, and not the women. Shahari einon birushus atzmon. They, in many cases, don't have the ability to just give on their own. Aval im tiyena rotzos lehisnadev dovar muad. But if a woman would like, if there were women who did want to make donations of a small amounts that their husbands would not worry about, masha huter lahen lehisnadev, things that are permissible for them to donate, mishum hachi hosif tikhu es trumasi. And that's why it added at the end, take my truma. So this is the answer actually to the second question. Sorry. The second question is that why did it repeat the words, take my truma? And the answer is because the first time it said, take my donation, Hashem was meant take it from the men. Then you can take safely in all cases. And then it also wanted to say, take from the women, because the Hashem, the Torah, didn't want us to think you cannot accept donations from the women. You certainly can accept donations from the women. However, you have to make sure that it's the situations in which they're able to make the donation that they wish to make. So that's answering that second question as to why it repeats, take my donation. Take from the men as a general principle, and take from the women when it is okay to do so. Next paragraph. Ela shegodol kocham shel ha'anoshim. However, the ability of the men to give is greater. Sheyecholim lasos hamitzvos l'shem mitzvos habore, because they are able to do the mitzvah of donating to the Mishkan because Hashem commanded them to do so, so they can have that in mind. Mishum hachi l'koman beParshas Vayakel. Therefore, later on in Parshas Vayakel, Amar HaKosuv, the pasuk says, Vayavohu ha'anoshim al hanoshim. The men came to donate on the women. We translated it as in addition to the women, but Zera Shimshon is now saying, if you translate it literally, it means the men came to take above the women. V'lo im hanoshim. The pasuk didn't say the men came with the women. Why? Lefisha nidvas ha'anoshim hoyisa chashuva, because the gifts that the donations that the men brought were considered more choshuv, more special, b'male yoser minidvas hanoshim, to a certain degree above the donations of the women. Afilu im isha achas tavi harbe mishalo, meaning even if a woman brought many things, she donated a lot to the Mishkan of her own belongings, o birushus bala, or she donated a lot with the permission of her husband, in which case totally both of those situations are totally permissible, as we said, to take the donations. V'ish echad yavi ma'at, and let's say one man brought less things. Lefisha nidvas ha'ish hi l'shem mitzvah gemura. The man's is considered of a higher level in this regard, that he is bringing a donation that he was commanded to bring. Shehu mitzuvah ba, he's commanded, ma she'ein kein nidvas isha, which is not the case when a woman brings a donation to the Mishkan. She wasn't commanded to do so. However, it was very meritorious for her to do so. But as the Zera Shimshon has explained previously at length, earlier in this piece, Godol mitzvah ve'osa, it's greater to be commanded to do a mitzvah and to do it than it is to do a mitzvah that one is not commanded to do. And that certainly tells us about the li lishmi. Why that's the third question that we can circle back to. Why did the Torah specifically regarding the mitzvah of donating to the Mishkan say, do it for me? Because the Torah was emphasizing that the men can do it for the sake of Hashem commanding them to do this mitzvah, whereas the women, definitely their gifts will be accepted, and definitely they get schar for giving gifts to the Mishkan. However, they are not able to have in mind, I'm making this donation because Hashem commanded me to. They were not mitzuvos, they were not commanded to do so. And now in this last paragraph, the Zera Shimshon is going to bring an additional reason, a new reason, as to why this mitzvah, it uses the word li, for me, meaning for my sake. The od yesh lomar, and we can also say something new. Al perush Rashi li lishmi, on that which Rashi explained, that when the pasuk says, bring a donation for me, it meant lishmi, for my sake. The amrin b'menachos, because we say in a Gemara in Maseches Menachos, shebechol parashas korbanos, and all of the sections in the Torah that deal with sacrifices, lo ne'amar bohen Kael, Elokim. It doesn't use the word Kael, which is sometimes used to refer to Hashem, and it doesn't use the word Elokim, which is often used to refer to Hashem. It doesn't use those words regarding korbanos. El Hashem ha-meyuchad bilvad, but only the special name of Hashem, which is the four-letter name of Hashem that we're not allowed to pronounce, the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey. That's the word that is generally used regarding korbanos. The tikain kol ha'avodos l'shem ha'meyuchad, and all of the sacrificial services were set up to be l'shem ha'meyuchad, in the name of the four-letter special name of Hashem. She'ein nodrim ela l'shem ha'meyuchad bilvad, because we do not make our vows to bring sacrifices except with using the four-letter name of Hashem. If a person wants to make a neder, a vow, to bring a korban, to bring a sacrifice, they should use that language, that they are making a vow to bring a korban to Hashem, having in mind the Yud, the Hey, and the Vav, and the Hey, that special four-letter name of Hashem. The ayin b'Zohar Parshas Mishpatim, you can see more about this in the Zohar on Parshas Mishpatim, uba Parshas Vayikra, and on Parshas Vayikra, uve HaRamban, and in the commentary of Nachmanides al HaTorah on the Torah Parshas Vayikra, on Parshas Vayikra. The Afkan Perish Rashi, and even here Rashi explains, Zos HaTrumah Shehem Nodrim. Rashi says this is the donation that they are vowing to make. Lo tihiyeh ela l'shem hameyuchad bilvad. It should only be for the sake of the four-letter name of Hashem, v'zehu li lishmi. And this is a new way to explain why it has to be to me for Hashem's sake. Because even though all mitzvahs should be done for Hashem's sake, with this mitzvah of donating to the Mishkan, the Torah is telling us, make your donations having in mind of the four-letter name of Hashem, the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, as opposed to any other possible name of Hashem, like Elokim, for example. Have rather than that, have in mind specifically the four-letter Shem HaMeyuchad when you make the donation. So this last paragraph, the Zera Shimshon brought an additional possible way of explaining why the pasuk said li here, to me, when there's a general rule of doing mitzvos l'shem Hashem, in the name of Hashem, but here perhaps a person has to specifically have in mind the special name of Hashem, the Shem HaMeyuchad. So the Zera Shimshon has started off with three questions regarding the psukim in the beginning of Parshas Trumah, and getting into some of the specific laws and ideas that are relevant to donations made to the Mishkan, and some of the rules that apply to that, specifically in distinguishing between men and women. And he also got into some of the general ideas that apply to mitzvos that women, when women do mitzvos that they're not obligated to do, or for that matter, if a man does a mitzvah that he's not obligated to do, and then circled back to answer all three of the questions, of course, and even give a bonus answer to the third question. Yasher Koch to joining us in the Zera Shimshon this week. We look forward, God willing, to learning again together in the Zera Shimshon next week.